Alright, you bitches.
Wow!
I just got back from an IMAX screening of the latest film from Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki's final film, Kimitachi wa do ikuru ka, or How Do You Live, or The Boy and the Heron. Well, actually, I don't think this is his final film, but if it was, I think this would be a good finale to his career. But really, if you think about it, can an artist really retire? Like, unless they become physically incapable, I think they will keep pushing themselves to create something even more beautiful. It is truly a curse. But that's not what this film is about. Well, I guess kind of in a way. I find that this film can go either way depending on who you are. It's definitely a rewarding experience, especially if you're a huge fan of Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli. And I do hate to say this, but there is a lot of fan service. But more in line of Miyazaki is paying homage to himself, like he is kind of patting himself on the back a little bit. Like, look at what I accomplished. I was responsible for all of your favorite moments. Please don't forget me. There are a lot of elements or motifs where you will recognize from his previous movies. Like the obvious, why does anime food look so good scenes, the Chihiro run, the sensation of flight, a stampede from a lot of cute animals, and of course, feet. Wait, what?
Miyazaki.
And there's probably way more Easter eggs that some weirdo on YouTube can make a profitable video about. But that's not me though, because I'm too lazy for that. On the opposite end, if you choose to have this film take your Ghibli virginity, you might just end up confused and maybe bored. This film can feel like a story that you would read to your child to get them to fall asleep. There are a lot of scenes of characters just doing simple stuff like putting on their clothes, bowing to each other, walking from one side to the other, lots of mundane stuff, which is a Miyazaki staple, but it does lead to a very slow pace. Now these slice of life moments to me feel like the animators are flexing. They are entirely unnecessary, but they do get the audience immersed to the world. And also it's just impressive to do that. But I will admit that sometimes it can be a bit too much. And it really makes you want to just close your eyes and take a nap. This film is 2 hours long, by the way. So if you're used to the fast-paced, quippy dialogue of a Disney movie, this film is not for you. That being said, this is a very difficult film to recommend, as a lot of my enjoyment came from my pre-existing knowledge of Hayao Miyazaki. The story of this film is sort of an autobiography of Miyazaki's life. After all, the man is 83, so he grew up in a post-World War II Japan. He had a mother who he had loved dearly, and was a central figure in his life. And so a lot of his female characters are based around how badass his mom was. But she also had an illness when he was young, and it affected him. All that experience is seen in the main character, Mahito, who is suffering quietly as he feels responsible for his mother's death, even though it wasn't his fault. He can't get over his grief, and that starts to affect his relationship with others. Like he keeps his stepmother Natsuko at an arm's distance, likely so he doesn't feel the same pain of loss again. He is the only male student with hair, so he gets bullied by the bald kids and beats their ass. But he still self-harms himself so that he has an excuse to not go to school. He is also constantly harassed by a harem claiming that his mom ain't dead. Eventually, he ends up in an Alice in Wonderland situation. Actually, there seems to be a lot of references to fairy tales, or maybe Disney. Natsuko especially reminded me of Snow White and her 7 babas. Anyway, Mahito enters a new world and meets some colorful characters, and he just watches the world do its thing. It's a whimsical adventure, but you can get lost, and it might require multiple viewings to understand what is going on. So that means bigger box office, baby! As the storyline becomes haphazardly put together, this is where the film becomes less about trying to tell a narrative and more about giving out good vibes. I always felt that the main objective of a Studio Ghibli film is to fill your tummy with emotional food, which is why Ghibli music works very well with lo-fi, and watching characters prepare food makes you hungry. I will say one of my favorite scenes is when Mahito meets Lady Himi, a firebender who makes Mahito a jelly and honey sandwich. It's pretty obvious who she's supposed to be in relations to Mahito, and the film never really feels the need to shove it down your throat. It just assumes you already know, or at least you're thinking that it could be. But this is also when we finally get to see Mahito smile and he becomes nostalgic of the sandwich, and that made me feel warm and fuzzy inside. But luckily, even if the story becomes confusing, the actual animation is incredible. Especially in the beginning, like, there's a scene where the world just starts turning into flames, and he's just running, and it's like, how the f did they animate that with their hands? I've never seen that before. It's just a testament that despite how old 2D animation is, you can still innovate. You can still do things that are just never existed. And it's crazy. Someone did that by hand. that came from somebody's brain and was able to be translated into a drawing. It's incredible. Too bad that shit's dying. But anyway, as you watch this film, you might feel like you're on drugs, which kind of makes me think that it was actually supposed to be called The Boy and the Heroine. But when I say that, I don't mean it in a negative connotation. The film is beautiful, filled to the brim of amazing 2D animation, paired with heavenly music by, of course, Joe Hisaishi. This film took its time to be created, where artists meticulously crafted each frame to be a wallpaper, which should be the norm for all 2D animated projects, but that's not the case. Sometimes I feel like the parakeets in the film are an allegory of the animators now that are trapped in a dying industry led by the king that only cares about profits and will destroy stability to achieve power. Or that could be a stretch, but the fact that I can come up with this idea should be a sign that there are many ways to interpret this story. But I also understand that if you don't know the context, then this film just becomes inaccessible and might seem like any other pretentious film. Just boring as shit. Just nice to look at sometimes. I feel like this is a story where Miyazaki realized that he is going to go senile, and he's portraying that fear in a tangible and abstract way before he forgets his entire life, or just dies. This is Miyazaki putting his memories together one last time in a work of art that will last for generations to come. Which brings us back to, how do you live? Because this is how Hayao Miyazaki lived. And that's a beautiful way to think about this film. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. The only thing I would just dox is that I fell asleep at some point, which is why this doesn't seem like a very fair review. but I mean, I watched it again and I still fell asleep, so that's a problem with that aspect. And of course, yeah, it can be kind of confusing. So I think that's a fair rating. Oh, and I needed more memes. I definitely needed more memes. Fuck Miyazaki's such a boomer. Get with the times, man. Add some skibbity toilet.
100円ください。